Hello everyone and welcome to another video from What Culture Wrestling, and of course, as always, when Stone Cold Steve Austin releases a brand new episode of the Broken Skull Sessions podcast, we are here to give you all of the best bits so you don't have to watch it if you don't have the time, of course. It was a long one, this one, 1 hour and 43 minutes, and who's got time to donate to that when you've got 4 hours of your time that was already donated to Zack Snyder's cut of the Justice League? Or maybe that was just me. But yes, his guest this week was Randy Orton the Viper. It was a good one, it was a long one, but it is worth you having a look at. Anyway, here's the best bits from it. I'm Adam Nicholas, this is What Culture Wrestling, and these are 10 things we learned from Randy Orton on Stone Cold's Broken Skull Sessions podcast. Number 10, Randy thought Austin didn't like him. Now, before the interview had even started between these two, Orton revealed that he wasn't exactly sure if Austin and him had a decent relationship, because actually, they'd never really sat down before this interview for a big old chinwag, so this was a first. Now, obviously, part of that has to do with timing, because Orton came onto the main roster in April 2002, and the following year at WrestleMania 19, Austin would of course retire after his match with The Rock. But Stone Cold said, to be honest, it's mostly because he's a bit of a loner overall. So it wasn't necessarily a personal thing that Austin hadn't socialised with Mr. RKO, but it also probably didn't help matters in terms of Orton's head that Austin had indeed been quite cutting with some remarks about the man's promo ability, and that's something that Orton definitely paid attention to. And if you were ever looking for an icebreaker, this is it. Number 9, he wasn't a wrestling fan. Now, something that completely took Stone Cold by surprise was that Orton admitted he wasn't really a wrestling fan back when he was a kid. In fact, even further than that, he didn't even really pay attention much to when his father had a wrestling career and was actually doing it full time. To him, wrestling was just Cowboy Bob's job. It was something he did to make a living, and Orton didn't feel like he needed to concern himself with it at all. In fact, he even jokes about the fact that between him and his mother, it wasn't like they'd regularly sit down and say like, hey, Dad's going to be on the telly tonight, let's watch him. That never really happened. He didn't start properly watching wrestling until he was in high school, and between his friends and he, they used to often talk about whether or not maybe he would want to follow in his father's footsteps, and he basically said it felt so impossible and he didn't have the self-confidence for it, so he didn't really ever see it happening. Look how wrong he was. Number 8, what The Undertaker told Vince in 2002. During Orton's first televised match against The Undertaker, which they mentioned in the session that was back in March 2002, but was actually in May 2002, slight little error there between the boys, but nevertheless, they were still talking about that match. And Orton says he was really happy with how generous the dead man was during this one. He said the dead man took arm drags, he took hip tosses, let him even do some diving attacks, and at the end of the match when they went to the back, Vince was apparently furious about the whole thing, didn't want Taker to have sold so much for Orton and let him get that much offense in. And when he asked the dead man what on earth he was doing, he said it was all about full circle, because that's what they do, right? At the end of the day, you get so much from the company and then you give back to the generation after. Orton said he was blown away by the fact that Taker was so giving to the young members of the roster. Somewhat ironically here, because this was a taped match, WWE ended up cutting the majority of Orton's offense from the match, but he says he'll remember it forever, and it was a fond memory of his between he and the dead man. Number 7, a random in-ring drill led to evolution. Now, as you can imagine, as a young wrestler in WWE, you've got to impress some people, you've got to turn some heads, and that's exactly what Randy Orton tried to do while he was doing a drill in the ring in 2002, and Triple H turned up at ringside. He said while he and an unnamed rookie were practicing their submissions in the ring, he noticed Hunter at the side and decided to start selling his ass off, really amped it up and turned it up in the hope that Triple H might actually notice him. And surprise, surprise, the pandering actually worked, because as Orton had been trying to grab those ropes to get out of the submission like a man dying of thirst, Hunter had paid attention, and later on he would be told from another person backstage that they were considering, the company, of putting him in a stable with Ric Flair and Triple H. At this point, Batista wasn't in the conversation, and neither was Mark Jindrak, of course, the other guy who initially was in Evolution. But this all came from Orton trying to sort of show off to Triple H. Number 6, Randy kept Thumbtacks from Backlash 2004. As a WWE pro wrestler, or just a pro wrestler in general, truth be told, you must have so many matches that you probably end up forgetting quite a few of them, save for the very best ones of your career. So keeping some mementos from the big ones probably seems like a bit of a no-brainer, truth be told, and Orton told Austin he did exactly that when it came to Backlash 2004 and his match against Mick Foley. Randy said that his father had never actually kept any trinkets from his career, so didn't have much to look back on when it was all said and done. He didn't want to make the same mistake. So in this match, he scooped up a handful of tacks, no word on whether they were covered in blood or not, to keep it home as a little memento of the occasion. This was a real coming-of-age milestone moment for Orton, who proved he wasn't just a pretty boy, he could also work as well. And he did go on to mention as well that he was super thankful for Mick Foley looking after him, I guess as best as you can in this kind of match at the time. Number 5, why he won't take credit for RKO memes. If you've ever been on wrestling Twitter, wrestling YouTube, or pretty much wrestling anything, you have seen at least one Randy Orton RKO meme. Whether it was the amazing counter to the shooting star press of Evan Bourne, or the reversal of Seth Rollins' curb stomp, or maybe even the springboard one that he did against CM Punk, you've seen the memes. All these RKOs look amazing. But Orton says he can't take credit for any of them. He told Austin that anybody who's ever taken a hugely creative RKO, and there's a long list of them, it always ends up coming down to the person who took it. It was their idea, and Orton said he's just there to basically put the finishing touches on it. In fact, Orton laughed out loud at the idea that he would be going up to people backstage and suggesting that they do loads of mad stuff before he hits them with an RKO. I mean, he'd probably get away with it, truth be told, but that's not how it goes down. But he did say that he loves that people still talk about those moments, and loves that he was actually a part of them too, which, let's be fair, it's a good legacy to leave behind. No pun intended. Number 4, which WWE moments he'd change? There were a few specific moments that Orton told Austin if he could go back, he would like to change, because at the end of the day, everybody's been young once, and back then, his attitude wasn't necessarily the best. He said he wished he'd been more attentive during WrestleMania 21 weekend. Ahead of a massive match against The Undertaker, he'd gone out on the Friday night with a bunch of the younger guys, got pretty damn drunk, and it ended up having a knock-on effect on Saturday. That night out meant that he slept in the following morning, which meant he missed his pre-agreed 9 AM rehearsal with The Undertaker, and as he finally did get to the practice space and managed to get himself together, he was greeted by the sight of The Undertaker, his father Bob Orton, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, Michael Hayes, and Mike Chioda all walking out looking extremely disappointed in him. Nobody said anything to Orton at the time, but he could tell that they were all mad and they were all upset with him. On top of that, he also says he regrets kind of scrambling together a 2-minute speech for his father's Hall of Fame induction. He says the guy deserved a lot more than that, as did The Undertaker on the build-up to their match, but Orton felt like he'd let them both down. Number 3, his Oscar moment. Now, by his own admission, Randy Orton has never really been that great of a promo guy. In fact, he called all of his interviews before the year 2020 pretty mediocre. But hey, it's better that the penny drops late than it never dropping at all. But on the March 2nd edition of Raw in 2020, when there was still fans in attendance no less, he cut an absolutely blistering promo on Beth Phoenix to the point where he actually ended up making her cry. I mean, it was actually so good that the fans ended up giving him a standing ovation, and when he went to the back, Vince told him that was his Oscar moment. He told Austin that seeing Vince stand up, take off his headset in gorilla position and hug him and then say those words really resonated with him massively, and he realised, I can't let this man down again. He kind of figured out a formula now. He was good at promos, he was good at being serious and drawing from real life. More of this kind of thing, please. Number 2, why he loved WWE's greatest wrestling match ever. At Backlash 2020, WWE booked Edge and Randy Orton into a bit of a corner, I think it's fair to say, as they started to advertise the main event of that show as the greatest wrestling match ever. No pressure there then, lads, but they both did feel it, and they both weren't necessarily happy about the moniker. On top of the seemingly unnecessary hype from their boss, they were also told that this would be the first match WWE would be practicing piping in crowd noise. They were going to use this as a bit of a tester, so the guys not only had to deal with it being the greatest wrestling match ever, but they also had to figure out the new landscape of working with the piped in crowd. But despite all of those factors, both guys were determined to make this a special moment and determined to make it work. And I think we can all agree they absolutely smashed it out of the park. This, while it may not have been the greatest wrestling match ever, was a ton of fun. Probably the best match between these two in quite some time. And they managed to turn something that was so difficult and so vast into something that actually worked. While Orton did tell Austin he realised you could never have the greatest wrestling match ever, he did absolutely love this one with Edge and ranks it as one of his favourites against the Rated R superstar. And number 1, with a bullet, he had no interest in working with Drew McIntyre. Now, this was probably the most unexpected moment in the whole podcast, truth be told. Randy Orton was brutally honest here with Austin and basically said he had no interest in working with Drew McIntyre in 2020. He'd admired the fact that McIntyre had come back from his release in 2014, reevaluated and changed himself and become such a valuable asset to the company, but he just didn't want to work with him. Nevertheless, Drew and Orton would end up working a bunch of matches together, including SummerSlam, Clash of Champions, Hell in a Cell, and a match on the November 16th edition of Monday Night Raw. And Orton said he did feel like they managed to come up with a good chemistry between the two. Not only that, but he also said he did grow to respect McIntyre's style of wrestling, being a body guy who can actually work, and he said he'd also watched him on Austin's Broken Skull Sessions podcast when he was on and enjoyed his candor too. And in a really cool moment following their match on Monday Night Raw where Drew reclaimed the WWE title, he said when they got to the back, Drew told Orton that he'd helped him more than anybody else in the business. That absolutely meant the world to Orton, proving that you didn't have to always take from the business, you could indeed give back. And to be honest, it was one of the most earnest, realist and just pleasant moments that Orton described during the whole podcast. So there you have it, those were the 10 things that we learned from Randy Orton on Stone Cold Steve Austin's Broken Skull Sessions podcast. But of course, this was an hour and 43 minutes long, so there wasn't just going to be 10 things. But if you found something maybe that you think is worth noting, please chuck it in the comments as well. Let us know what you thought about the video while you're down there too. Don't forget to like and share. Hit the old subscribe button if you haven't already. It's free, by the way, so it doesn't cost you a damn penny. You can see the original article for this at whatculture.com/WWE. You can follow What Culture on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE. You can follow me on Twitter if that's your thing at It's Adam Nicholas. Or if you just want some more videos, there should be some just over here. I think it's over there. I've lost my brain, who knows. Anyway, I've been Adam Nicholas. This has been What Culture Wrestling, and we'll see you on the next one.